Thousands of people have fled as lava flowed towards the town of Goma during the recent eruption of Mount Nyiragongo in the Democratic Republic of Congo have crossed into Rwanda. They're now receiving food, shelter and blankets from aid agencies.
The volcano that erupted last month in the Democratic Republic of Congo has displaced thousands of families, and many are finding safety in neighbouring Rwanda. Some had to flee in the dark as lava flowed from Mount Nyiragongo towards the town of Goma. Joyce was among those escaping.
The volcano erupted and the tremors were horrible. At night we could not sleep, and during the day houses would just collapse.
People said they were struggling to find enough food and water as the UN called for aid. They also warned about the risk of cholera in Congo last week. Those who crossed into Rwanda are now receiving food, shelter and blankets from the UN Refugee Agency. At least 31 people died and 3,000 homes were destroyed by the eruption. Roads used for business and supplying aid in the region were also cut off. Although the lava stopped just short of the city limits, thousands more people fled last week when the government warned that the volcano, one of the world's most active, could erupt again. Mount Nyiragongo volcano last erupted in 2002, killing over 200 people and displacing more than 100,000.
Well, as you've heard, hundreds of thousands of people fled, fearing a second eruption was imminent. This was after government warnings. That eruption didn't happen in the end, but it did raise questions about the ability to predict these eruptions in the first instance. Earlier in the week, I spoke to volcanologist and science journalist Dr. Robin George Andrews about the volcano and the likelihood of future eruptions. Robin Andrews, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, Robin, this volcanic eruption that took place in Goma, I suppose, given that we've seen it before, I think it was 2002, was this something that we knew would happen again, if not when?
Yeah, so the eruption of Nyiragongo was an inevitability. It's one of the most active volcanoes in the world, depends how you measure it really, but essentially it erupts, several times within a human lifetime. That's pretty active. But knowing when was really difficult because for several reasons. So scientists can't actually agree on what a precursor signal is for this volcano, essentially meaning they don't know quite what it does before an eruption happens. Each volcano is quite different. So whereas some volcanoes around the world do more predictable things that can allow such a forecast to happen, Nyiragongo can kind of just erupt. Part of the reason why is it had the world's largest lava lake at its summit. And to have that, you need a connection to a magma source deep below that continuously refuels itself. So the way Nyiragongo has erupted in the past is that essentially that magma just eventually, very suddenly forces its way open through cracks on the side of the volcano, these things called fissures, and the lava spills out. And being quite a weird lava, lacking much of a compound called silica, which kind of gives some rigidity to most lavas, this one doesn't have much of it at all. So this lava can flow at, 40 miles an hour, 60 kilometers an hour kind of thing down slope, which is a lot faster than most lavas flow. So, there's no clear way to determine whether or not it's going to erupt. The other thing is, this is the first time that an expansive array of seismic equipment, among others, have been set up around the volcano and operational during an eruption. So it's been building up over the years, this kind of array. But this is the first time that scientists have actually been able to listen to what it does during an eruption, which is great for future eruptions, but they don't really have anything to compare it to in the past to say, oh, here's a signal that showed that it was about to erupt. So without knowing what to look for, it made forecasting this latest eruption very difficult. And in fact, scientists seem to generally agree at the moment that there were no clear precursors before the eruption. So yeah, it's a very difficult volcano to monitor and forecast.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what happens over time. You've described this volcano, this mountain that's quite unique, and that these fissures occur over time. Over time, will it happen more frequently because of these fissures and these eruptions, or is it unpredictable even then? I mean, I'm just thinking that 2002 was just the other day, really, to be honest.
Yeah.
Could the next one happen even quicker?
Yeah, it's really difficult to say. That some of the old eruptions. So this thing has been erupting long before humans were, had set up a huge city there. And in historical times, recent history, the eruptions have come through not just new fissures opening up in the side of the volcano, but the reopening of old fissures that are already there, because they basically act as like weak points, it's like scar tissue or something. It's tricky. I mean, at the moment, scientists are really on edge because not only because they're aware of a second eruption at the volcano itself, but because magma has been injected beneath parts of the city itself, just south of the volcano proper. And that can bring with it all kinds of additional risks that are hard to forecast. So, yeah, it's really difficult. I mean, it's almost even with volcanoes that are very forecastable, volcanologists won't say, "Oh, it's about here we go. It's about to happen. There's going to be an eruption." Unless a volcano, even when volcanoes give off, even when they twitch and they convulse and they degas and there's lots of earthquakes. I don't think it's very unclear that. Volcanologists will almost never say there's definitely going to be an eruption. Normally, what they look for are big changes in what that volcano's background activity are doing. So some volcanoes are heavy sleepers; they don't make any noise for ages, and then suddenly they start rumbling, and that's a sign. Whereas some volcanoes are always quite twitchy and active, and having this lava lake at the top of Nyiragongo and having sort of fairly regular seismic activity, although not that noticeable by people, I guess. And regular degassing. It's one of the biggest CO2 emitters in the world, so it's tricky. Like, I think in this case, the reason the evacuations happen is the authorities are acted by that precautionary principle of, well, that a lot's happening. We're not quite sure what may happen. So let's just get people out of harm's way just in case, which is 100% the right thing to do in this moment. But as for when it will erupt, sooner or later, volcanoes don't act on human schedules, so it's impossible to say for sure, unfortunately.
You talked about lava going underneath the city. What does that mean? Does that make it more unstable, more vulnerable? What does that translate to?
So the way that scientists determine that magma has been injected under parts of the city, roughly around the urbanized shores of Lake Kivu in the city, is they use radar systems attached to satellite, and that basically checks to see the changing shape of the ground. And sometimes the ground can swell up a little bit if there's magma there. Sometimes it actually sinks because the magma is forcing the rock either side open. So actually it counter-rigidity makes it sink. Either way, they can use this to track the movement of magma. And what it means is essentially adds like a wild card element to proceedings, which obviously no one wants. So in the past 12,000 years, I think recent work shows there have been, just over a dozen types of eruptions on the lakeshore itself. They're called phreatomagmatic eruptions. And basically what that means is when you have a shallow body of water like a lake, as opposed to like the sea or something, if you have magma injected into it and it mingles with it in a certain way, it can cause quite violent explosions that leaves kind of like craters in the ground. Sometimes these explosions can create sort of like forward flowing avalanches of superheated volcanic gas and ash, which obviously is not great. These things are very hard to predict. At least the onset of these things are hard to predict. So that's obviously making scientists nervous. The other risk is there's a lot of dissolved carbon dioxide and methane in Lake Kivu, and a lot of it's at the bottom of the lake under all this water pressure, the weight of the water above it. It's like 1,500 feet. It's keeping it trapped at the bottom there. And scientists are trying to work out what it would take to unleash some of this gas all at once, sort of thing. What would overturn the denser lower layer and bring it up to the surface? And there's a potential risk that a very vigorous underwater eruption could, displace that lower layer of gas, heat it up, make it more buoyant, which maybe cause something called a limnic eruption, which is just an eruption of all this gas onto all these noxious gases onto the surface. And it's really unclear what is needed to cause one of these things in a lake this big. But just the mere possibility that, something like an underground injection of magma may trigger it if it's prolific enough, is nerve-wracking enough. So yeah, those are the two main risks, as well as fissures may open somewhere in the city and you might get that fast-flowing lava coming out literally right in the city rather than from the flanks. So yeah, it's again, it's an unenviable situation for people who are monitoring this thing to be in, actually.
So it seems as if there's quite a lot of unique features around Nyiragongo that create this drama for the people of Goma. That it's near water, that this lava can mix and cause a water-lava reaction. But also, I think I heard you say in another interview that the Earth is splitting, that Africa is splitting. It may take a couple of million years, but that tension is also there as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most fascinating parts of the world really is the East African Rift, which stretches from the Red Sea down to Mozambique. And essentially you have, there are two larger tectonic plates, but you have three smaller tectonic plates, these bits at the top of Earth's surface that's got to drift around. And they're essentially splitting Africa in three different directions. But primarily this stretch of land is being split, in two really major different directions, about a few inches a few inches every decade. So it's not something you'd ever notice. But that rifting has been going for quite a long time. It's resulted in two branches, the western branch, which the Nyiragongo is on, and the eastern branch. The eastern branch is actually the one more known for its volcanism. The western actually more for its earthquakes. So it's Nyiragongo is almost like a special case in that sense. But overall, this rifting essentially is creating all these sort of cracks, allowing magma to form and build up, sort of thing, which is kind of why you get these volcanoes and these sort of patterns. And you have these upwellings of mantle material, which is the layer just beneath the crust, from deeper within the earth, bring up all these sort of strange chemistries from far below, which kind of helped create, some of the world's strangest volcanoes, including Nyiragongo, with its hyperfluid lava. So it's not something that day to day that anyone has to worry about. It will never be a day-to-day worry or anything. But the reason you have so many earthquakes in this part of the world and so many volcanoes is because of this East African Rift system and these plumes that are coming up as well. It's a really unusual situation. You get rifting elsewhere in the world, you get mantle plumes elsewhere in the world. Sometimes you get them overlapping, but even when you do, it's still a completely different situation from the one you get along the East African Rift. So it's an interesting place to live if you're there, even for a snapshot of Earth's time.
So one of the things that I've been seeing, and this is literally a day or so after the eruption, are people walking over this lava and what was once, sadly, their homes. Is there a danger to doing that? Maybe my head is kind of fixated on earthquakes where you have after tremors and things like this. What's the story with volcanoes? And does lava cool down quite quickly?
If lava flows, obviously when they're molten, are incredibly dangerous. But even after they have cooled down for a few days, they're still likely to be quite hot. This lava, because it's so fluid, it kind of can stretch out quite thinly as it moves. It's normally more viscous lava that kind of bunches up. Now this stuff can just keep flowing. And as a result of it being quite thin and spread out, it can cool quicker than your average lava sort of thing. But but even a few days after the lava has cooled, it's quite dangerous to climb on it and sit on it. Although I can understand the temptation because they're, fascinating, otherworldly looking things. Because even if the top of the lava has cooled, there's a chance that the inner bit is still quite hot, perhaps even molten in certain cases. There's a small chance in this case that someone could be on top of a thicker bit of lava flow and fall into the hotter or perhaps even molten bit below. So I think better to be safe than sorry in this case, and if possible, don't climb on the freshly cooled lava flows because they don't suddenly just freeze up and that's it. It takes the innards a lot longer to cool than the outside. So appearances can be deceiving, I think is what I'm saying.
All right. And I guess perhaps finally, it's difficult to tell people to leave an area, but I suppose one just has to prepare as best as one can, i.e. try and get science behind predicting, however difficult that might be, because it does seem inevitable that at some point we will see another eruption.
Yeah, so the way that this volcano is being monitored is for the Goma Volcano Observatory, who are doing their utmost to monitor this volcano. They've got a really decent suite of monitoring equipment available now, compared to a decade or so ago. And there's a large sort of cadre of international scientists also cooperating. Some are on the ground, some are in the area, some are further afield. They're also looking at the stream of data that's coming in and trying to interpret what's going on. But it's true that the Goma Volcano Observatory has had funding problems recently. The World Bank recently cut off their funding, and I think I get the impression that the amount of money they get from the DRC government is not sufficient for the task that they've been asked to do. So they can still monitor. They still have monitoring capabilities. During this eruption, they could still monitor the volcano, but it's a very difficult volcano to monitor, not just because of the mercurial nature of the volcano, but because the seismic instruments in the area, which are quite remote, it's sometimes dangerous to go out and try and repair them. There have been several reports of theft and vandalism, and some seismic stations left, unfixed after a while. So they're working under very difficult conditions, and I would hope that after an event like this, which could have been a lot worse, somehow, this eruption was relatively, at least the eruption on the 22nd of May was, oddly short-lived, at least for now. Who knows to say whether it's over or not, or whether it's just taking a pause. It was still highly devastating, and I'm hoping that the authorities acknowledge that and acknowledge that, the researchers at the Goma Volcano Observatory need every bit of support they can get, because Nyiragongo is definitely one of Africa's most dangerous volcanoes, one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the world, you could argue, although, again, it's hard to compare volcanoes to volcanoes. So, yeah, the better they're able to do the job, the safer people will be. So, yeah, hopefully they get a boost in funding in the future, but we'll see.